trees. The breeze will softly be blowing, and sunshine rest on your wings. Little bird with no one to sing to, won't you sing a little song to me? All your friends will return from the Southland, and you'll be singing in sweet harmony.
Welcome. I'm Bill Haney. Let's have a conversation. Today we have two very special guests, and I know they won't take it the wrong way. I hope they won't. When I say they're rather unconventional. What I mean by that is not only do Jeff Lange and Leanne Whitman have quite diverse talents and interests, they also happen to be quite good at the very many things they do. But as wide a range as their interests and their activities span, there's one common theme that runs through all their interests, and that is their passion for nature and their commitment to make a difference in preserving our precious and delicate natural places. Jeff and Leanne have traveled many roads to bring their stories to our studio today. And I don't just mean that long drive from northern Michigan. As you will hear, Jeff has traversed this state talking about the organization he founded to protect and preserve one of nature's most spectacularly beautiful and interesting waterfowl, the loon. Since filming and producing The Uncommon Loon, the seasonal journey of one loon family, Jeff has recently finished a film about sandhill cranes and has done several short pieces, such as What's in a Michigan Wetland, which won honors as the best 3-minute film at the Michigan Micro Movie Festival in Traverse City. Jeff and Leanne traveled down from Michigan's North Country to present his stunning film, The Dance of the Sandhill Crane, to the Clarkston Area Backyard Birders Club. And as if that weren't enough, Jeff uses another of his talents, music, to team with Leanne's beautiful voice in the musical duo Indigo to communicate about nature and wildlife. And we've heard a sample of that, and we'll hear more. We'll talk with Jeff and Leanne about these things. And it's a special treat, they're going to perform another couple of songs for us during this program. Jeff and Leanne, welcome to Conversations with Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
I'm delighted to have you here. We have a number of things we can talk about, but first of all, I want to talk about Jeff's interest in preservation and his activism. Jeff, you must have had started very young in your interest. So take us back to the beginning. I know you live in Alanson, which some of us mispronounce as Allenson, which I've done frequently, but I didn't do it then, I hope.
You have to live there a while. So.
Yes. And it's not far from both the Big Mac and Petoskey, is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
But where were you living when the nature preservation bug began to bite you and fascinate you? Where were you then?
Well, I was living in Saginaw. I joined the Nature Conservancy in the early 80s. I started fly fishing soon after that. One thing I did was, when we first got into fishing, we met Art Newman, my cousins and I, and my brother, and he was one of the 3 guys who founded Trout Unlimited way back, I think, in the 50s. Mm-hmm. And he had a rod shop in Saginaw, and he always stressed not just fishing, but he stressed the importance of conservation, rather. Mm-hmm. And introduced me to the ecosystem of a river. He focused not just on catching trout, but on preserving the river for the trout's sake, and letting the fishing take care of itself was kind of one of his mottos. So, and I learned about mayflies, caddisflies, mm-hmm. stoneflies, because those are the insects that you imitated when you fished. So, and this was kind of like science and nature in one. So preservation comes natural as you begin to understand how these things are linked and how one broken link in the chain can break down the whole system. For instance, the trout stream I fished as a child and young adult had a sandy bottom, I noticed. And in some places along the shore where there was development, people had cabins and they cleared the vegetation right down to the shore so they could see the river. And what this did was cause a lot of erosion for the stream, and that part of the trout stream was all sandy bottom, whereas upstream, where we fish sometimes too, there was no development, and it was a gravelly bottom, which is a much healthier stream for trout. So,
and I know you mentioned mayflies and caddisflies. One of your beautiful songs, one of my favorites, is about the mayfly. And I'm delighted that you and Leanne have recorded several of your songs for us, and that's one, and perhaps we should hear it right now.
When the fog is clear, she will see. Oh, when the time is nears, set her free. All the world awaits her silent song. Where there's a verse to right every wrong, a peace revealed to all who sing along. When her wings unfold, she will fly. Before a story's told, she must die. A fleeting gift to comfort you and I. Soon the air it sings with the sound, a courtship on the wing, dancing round, rising up, so gently spinning down. Now her wings are still, drift away. secret holds until another maid is safe within the riverbed waves.
So, Jeff, I interrupted you. I know that gave you an appreciation of how delicate a balance there is in nature, and how man's intervention, as you mentioned with clearing off the brush and the growth along the shore, can trigger a chain of events that have unforeseen consequences. So tell us a bit, if you will, about when you began. It's been 20, 30 years ago that you started making your observations, apparently.
Yeah, well, after that, sometime in the mid-'80s, my brother and I got involved in loon preservation. We got a small grant from the small game, from the non-game grant fund that Michigan had back then. So we went around and we started identifying and registering lakes where loons nested, but were having nesting problems. So we made a list of all these. And one thing I noticed, and other groups were doing this at the time too, is that these loon nesting lakes the loons had generally lost their nesting habitat to development. You know, again, it's development along the lake shores. Since loons nest right on the water, they can't nest back in the marsh like other waterfowl do, because they can't walk very well. So once their nesting site is developed, they're without a nesting site. So what we started doing once we got all these lakes identified is, and the Nature Conservancy was involved in this, and Bill Robinson from Northern Michigan University, he had a lake registry program, and we started to identify how we could give loons back their breeding sites, their nesting sites. So we used artificial nesting platforms. They started using them out east. Since then, they used to make them out of cedar logs. Now we make them out of PVC. So we gave loons a way to nest, which got them off of the shore where scavengers could get them. Loons always prefer islands, and got them out into the lake. The nesting raft is a floating raft, so it goes up along with rising water levels in the spring, and it goes down if there's a drought. So, and another thing it does is it's an island, and loons always prefer islands.
That also then, being out there, observing the loons and monitoring their sites, also introduced you then to some of the other species, I imagine, the sandhill cranes and the ospreys and the herons. Is that what developed your interest then in expanding beyond the focus on loons, and also then paying attention and eventually doing films on some of the other creatures? Yeah.
Well, I decided, since I worked for Michigan Loon Watch, or I volunteered for them, we actually combined all these programs into one. We called it Michigan Loon Watch back in the early 80s. And at some point in the, after that, I wanted to make a film to further educate people about loons, since that was one of our missions, was for education. And I thought that was a good way to do it. So I chose Round Lake, which is near my house, and I set up filming there, and I just filmed a loon family. I decided to film a loon family throughout the nesting season to show people what what the loons face.
Yeah. Well, you must have
during the typical
started
season.
even before that, then in your childhood, with an interest. You didn't just in your 20s jump into that. You must have, when you were a kid growing up, I would imagine you had interest. And who were the figures that were important to you when you were young?
Well, I always read a lot of Carl Sagan, Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke. And later on, I read a lot of Charles Darwin stuff. And these guys, not Charles Darwin, but they all wrote about science fiction, except for Charles Darwin. But all these three authors also wrote about science a lot. So I learned a lot of things about natural selection, things about natural history. And that kind of steered me into the area, where...
You get into Greenpeace then, involved with that? Or?
I wasn't so much involved with it. I was really impressed when they came and hung a banner from one of Dow Chemical's sites there.
Yes, I remember.
And it kind of started some things going, where it got everybody aware. Well, I think I was involved in the nuclear site they were building at the time, but it kind of got everybody involved, at least aware of what was happening in the river. The Tittabawassee River that flowed near where I lived never froze in the winter. And you could smell the chemicals.
Yeah.
Later on, it started freezing and became one of the best walleye fishing rivers in the state.
Yeah.
So
I looked at the land on the Tittabawassee a number of years ago, probably about 30, and it certainly has changed. Now, Leanne, are you also a native of Michigander? Is this familiar territory for you too?
Yes, it is. I was born and raised in Saginaw, Michigan, and although we lived in the city, my father and mother always made sure we had opportunities to enjoy nature and learn about things. And last night when you mentioned about making maple syrup, that was one of the things that my dad did with us.
Oh, yeah.
We had a grove of maple trees, and he taught us how to tap the trees and boil down the sap to make syrup. And he taught us about, the streams and the rivers and the plant life. And so
it really makes you appreciate it so much more when you've actually done it. For example, 1 spoonful of maple syrup. People who haven't done the tapping and the boiling down, don't really realize it's 40 to 1.
Yeah.
And and I think
amazing.
at the rate we do it, if we paid ourselves $1 an hour, then syrup would sell for about $500 a pint.
it would.
But though you both have experienced some of the really wonderful natural treasures of Michigan at a very early age. And Jeff, I know that you have been on a quest of these kind of things many years, and that it's continued throughout. Is that when you developed, though, your interest in loons, or did that come later?
Loons came later. In fact, it was kind of strange how that happened. Is we heard the DNR was giving out grants, and we tried to think of a species that comes into contact with people, especially people who didn't know anything about wildlife or very little, which was us. So we put in for, I'd read about some of these studies that people had done on loons, and we figured that was a good, if you don't know anything, you can't just start out climbing trees, banding eagles or anything like that, or banding anything, So we picked loons because it was the very interaction between loons and people that was both the problem, but was going to be the solution too. It had to be the solution, because if people weren't aware of them and weren't aware of what development was doing on the lakes, they weren't going to change.
Right.
So they were aware of where the loons nested at, and to avoid them, sometimes we like I said, we put out rafts. We put out buoys to keep loons and people separate, and they learned where those places were at, and to avoid them while they were on the lake.
So it's been an evolution for you too, then, and you. Part of what you've done is to take your own history and your own journey and then to communicate it actually through music too, as well as through your documentaries. So I know that I never expected really to be in the presence of the Lone Ranger. My wife won't forgive me for that, but I know that must have been what you were called by some of your good friends, the Lone Ranger. The loon, by the way, is a bird that many people have heard before they've seen it. But that's some experience up north at night to hear the loon flying over a lake. It's really special.
Yeah, my cousin and I, Tom, were fishing on an Upper Peninsula lake, and we heard a loon, and I had no idea what it was. This was before we got involved, obviously, in this, and I wondered what that call was. And when I actually saw the bird that it was, I couldn't believe that sound could come out of such a small animal.
It's amazing.
It echoed so far across the lake to where we were. And it was just unbelievable that it was that's what I was hearing.
It's a beautiful bird.
This bird on the water.
Yeah. A friend of mine, in fact, the man who made the maple syrup that we gave you, was one of our group that did the tapping and the boiling down. But he is carving a loon and a feather at a time. It's a kind of it's taken him years. He's made a lot of other things in between times. But Wally has been a member of the Birders Club that you spoke at. And he got a chunk of wood that just cried out to him to convert it into a loon, and he's just doing it a feather at a time. Spectacular thing.
And speaking of the Birders Club, while we were doing the presentation last night, which my cousin Penny initially approached me to come down for that. My cousin Penny Bennett, who was there, her father was there, who was my uncle Dave Bixby, and he was in the audience. And it occurred to me later that while I was still a child, in my early teens, he used to operate the Oakland bookstore.
Oh.
And he gave me a copy, my first copy ever of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Oh. And I always remember that because, as everybody knows the story, people who know of that story have probably seen the movie. And what wasn't so present in the movie was the fact that, you have Captain Nemo and you have his passengers aboard the Nautilus. One of his passengers was a professor of natural history who was a naturalist, And when you read that book, you learned a lot about natural history, and also about the sea. And that is one way that led me on to other things, and was all because of my Uncle Dave, My father had given me books too, and I learned a lot from them. He took me fishing a lot. But it just goes to show you what a person, what little things we do in life
can make a huge difference.
Can have an impact on what you do for the rest of your life.
Well, you mentioned earlier about the conservancies. And one of our guests on an earlier program a few months ago was Shannon Steele, the Associate Executive Director of the North Oakland Headwaters Land Conservancy. Very important and very great organization, been in existence for 50 years and has done remarkable work in preserving. In fact, they have a butterfly that only lives in one small area near Davisburg, and they preserved this area. So the conservancies are quite important. So they also, you worked with them. I presume you've had experience with conservancies too.
Well, it's no coincidence that on at least 3 lakes I can think of, Round Lake, Crooked Lake, and Pickerel Lake up where I live, all of the rafts that we place on those lakes are adjacent to conservancy properties. Because while you can place a raft near a wetland and hope that wetland is always protected, I don't always have a lot of confidence that wetlands are going to be protected, and I don't have a lot of confidence that people aren't going to develop near a loon raft. But I have a great amount of confidence in the Conservancy's lands is going to stay natural,
Yeah.
you know. So I do get with the Conservancy, and I was telling Shannon about this last night, how important they are
Yeah.
to loon preservation, you know.
Yes.
They protect the land, but it helps protect the bird out in the water too.
I remember one fact that really struck me about the size and the importance of the conservancies is that there is more protected land in the United States in the conservancies than in all of our national parks put together,
Really?
which is
I believe that.
stunning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
good for the conservancies. And by
One-
the way, we're going to have them, executive director, Sue Gillian, will be on our program here in the spring.
Oh, how neat.
Yeah.
That was very popular when Shannon appeared. And
It was a very good show.
yeah, we
I learned
want-
a lot from that show.
yeah, well, we want
Yeah.
to share that information with our viewers.
Well, I can just tell you a quick story is about the film, the Uncommon Loon. When I set up to film that, I built a little blind where I watched the loons on the nest, and it didn't take long for somebody to report to the Conservancy that my blind was on Conservancy property.
Oh, really?
And I got in a lot of trouble with them doing that.
You were
know?
trying to do something good.
Yeah, and so we ended up all becoming friends, and it all worked out. And one of my first film showings was to the Conservancy, but it showed me how diligent they are in protecting their lands.
And they
You know,
yeah.
they saw that blind. They said that blind's got to go. You know, and I couldn't tear it down while the loons were nesting.
Yeah.
So I did tear it down afterwards. But, it was just a random temporary blind, but it was very important to learn.
Well, one of the things that is a good development, I think, is that the younger generation is being introduced to these things. Darrell Bernard, the executive director of Seven Ponds Nature Center, has been both the speaker at the Clarkston Area Backyard Birders Club and with me here on this Conversations program. And the young people, I don't know the number offhand, even though I'm on the board, I should know that, but how many thousands of young people go through there and get often their first introduction, but one of their most important introductions to wildlife and to nature at places like Seven Ponds. Unfortunately, where we are here in the Clarkston area, in Independence Township and Brandon Township, we have a wealth of nature centers.
Oh, neat.
And so everybody, young people and older people, are, I think, more and more enjoying the benefits of that have accrued from organizations like the Conservancies. Well, this has been very enjoyable. I want you to tell us more, though, Leanne, about your music and how you came to get together with Jeff here in a musical way. How'd that happen?
I'll be glad to. Jeff and I met in 2015 at was called the Back Porch Coffee House, and that's in Charlevoix. And we attended a jam after the concert, and we discovered we really had some common ground in music. And Jeff plays the best Doogie McLean music I'd ever heard. And I was really drawn to that and his style of guitar playing. And so we got together a few times and played some music, and then we fell in love and the music became sweeter, and we started our band, and we've been playing together almost 3 years now.
I think we communicated. I was finishing the Crane film,
Yes.
editing the Crane
Yeah.
film.
Yeah, we would communicate. He says,
Yeah.
"Why?" We'd share some music, and he'd say, "I got to go work on my Crane film because I got to get that ready." But so we just had so much fun with that. Yeah.
Well, I won't say that was a looning way to get together, but I did think that. But that is something. How'd you come up with the name Indigo Moon?
We had a list
That's
of probably 100
your
band
territory.
names.
Yeah.
I guess we're both drawn to the moon, and it just sounded kind of neat. And I could just
Yeah.
picture us playing out in the moonlight. So,
Yeah, pretty romantic.
so hopefully we're like a band that's once in a blue moon. So,
Yeah. Well, I know a number of your documentaries and your songs have to do with individuals, coming together in whether it's loons or herons or sandhill cranes or mayflies or whatever. It's one thing that all beings share, and so it's really interesting and very appropriate that joint love of nature and music fused you together in this wonderful musical duo that you have. And we've heard some of your music early and then throughout, and I actually think we would be best to conclude with one of your beautiful songs called Descent. Tell me about Descent, how you happened to, who wrote Descent? Did you?
Did I write all of Descent?
Yes, you did.
I guess I did, yeah.
Yes, you did.
Well, it came from, I don't know if I mentioned before, Charles Darwin. I do a lot of reading of his. He was a naturalist. Above anything, above all he did to change the world, he was a naturalist, and he was interested in little things. I have a little film on my is it the Planet Michigan site where there's a nuthatch that comes and feeds at my feeder, and I'm sure you've seen many of them where like a chickadee will come and get a seed, take it to a branch, put it in his feet, crack it open, eat the
Right.
seed. Nuthatch will come to the feeder, grab the seed, take it down to the deck railing I have in the house, find this little hole that's in there, drop the seed in there, and peck it open and then eat it. Because he can't hold I learned from that he can't hold, or she, the seed in its feet while eating. So, and these little things fascinate me.
Yeah.
There's kind of dumb little things, but they show how an animal was designed, what they can do, and further, more than that, how they adapt to eat things that we provide for them using our own tools, this hole in the deck railing, And he did it over and over again. I have a little short film, it's like a minute and a half on the Planet Michigan site that people can see on my YouTube page. So
Well, we'll put those sites up so people can access them.
Okay. And Darwin was fascinated by little things like this, It led to really big things for him, But and that's kind of what the song is about,
Wonderful.
It's really about the transitional species that linked, big changes from the sea to the land, from the tree to the land, from the land back to the sea, in some cases. So.
Well, we'll conclude our conversation then on a musical note, and hear Descent. And I want to thank you, so very much for coming down and sharing this time with us. And I hope we see you again. I know we're going to hear you because you kindly gave me a copy of your CD, and it'll get plenty of views, I can assure you. So thanks very much, and I want to thank our listeners and our viewers for joining with us in this conversation. And I assure you that we will have another interesting conversation coming up, and would like to be with you again for that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Winding stream, shape the land, flowing water through my hand, growing tree, standing strong, tells the story
of ages
is gone, catching sunlight, breathing life. Hear it sing. Neath the tree, by the stream, sings a bird with a dream, holding feathers to the wind. Feel the changes from within, from the head to the wing. Hear it sing. Where the stream meets the sea, life is sung fathoms deep. Left the land on the tide, swim together side by side. From the land to the sea, hear them sing. In a past southern land, two together, hand in hand, left their footprints, shared the dream of their days on the wing. From the tree to the land, hear them sing. Across the sea, through the land, hear us sing.